Have you ever considered what it might be like to be a man? If you're a woman and you've often wondered what's going on in the hearts or minds of men, then you're like many women that I talk to. In my work with single women, one of the most fun things that I've been able to do is interview many men, hundreds of men over the last few years. And I have done man panel events where I've interviewed all men. And I've also just talked to ordinary men, learned a lot from my husband, brothers, father, different men that I've been privileged to know in my life. Because I believe that when we, as women, can understand more about men, it can help us to have more compassion for them and also to improve our communication and connection with them. Now, sure, I believe that men could benefit from learning more about women. Since this is mainly an audience of women who are interested in having a relationship with a man, then I feel like there are some things that I've learned that might be valuable to you for me to share. And did you know that in the Mr. Right Academy program, every month there's a brand new interview with a man where we ask the men those kinds of questions that are coming up in our Mr. Right Academy group, and I get to share those with you. And there's also an archive of over 100 interviews where you hear directly from the mouths of men what's going on in their minds and hearts. So if you want an education about men to help you to be more effective in your relationships with them, not just in your romantic relationships, but all relationships, that's just one of the many benefits in the Mr. Right Academy program. I'll share a little more with you about that in just a minute. Well, first, I want to get into sharing with you a few things that I've learned about men. So the first one is men don't necessarily feel like Superman or James Bond. Like sometimes we see men as having this rough, tough, brave, bold exterior. And they seem like they're kind of like non-emotional. A lot of men could seem non-emotional, or they feel like it could seem like they're tough and able to kind of handle anything. And what I've found is that men actually, even if they come across that way, and I realize not every man does, every man's an individual, but a lot of men come across as being, a little less emotional, a little more logical, a little more like I got this, a little bit more rough and tough on the outside. But what I've learned is that men often have very tender feelings inside, and they can be hurt very easily and very deeply. And it's kind of like the rough and tough exterior is like the coating outside of a very tender heart for many men. Most men don't necessarily have the confidence that they could go out there and attract every woman. In fact, many of them have faced a lot of rejection, a lot of hurt, a lot of heartache, a lot of disappointment. And of course, some men, just like some women, are bitter as a result of these experiences. And yet, so many men really have deep and tender hearts. So that's the first thing. Most men don't feel like James Bond or like Superman, even if they're kind of coming across as kind of rough, tough on the exterior. They oftentimes have very tender feelings, and a lot of them can be hurt very easily and have been hurt very easily. And I just think that's important to remember, because I think sometimes that because men don't necessarily express, or a lot of men don't necessarily express their emotions or show their emotions quite in the same way as often many women do, it can be easy to think that maybe they're not feeling things in the same way. But I've found that men feel things very deeply and can be wounded very deeply and very easily. And it's not just about the male ego. They can fall hard for a woman. They can experience pain and rejection in ways that maybe a woman may not fully understand. So that's the first one. Number two is, because men are expected to approach or to take the initiative for the most part when it comes to romantic relationships, a lot of men have experienced rejection. And especially since the Me Too movement, men who are aware and men who are sensitive to that and respectful of that, when they have a desire or they have a need or a want to connect with a woman in a romantic way, and yet they don't want to be rejected, and they don't want to be seen as the creepy guy, and they don't want to be putting unwanted attention on a woman. And so it can be pretty pretty challenging to be a man in that respect. And yet a lot of women are upset or frustrated when a man's not necessarily taking that initiative. So one of the things that we talk about in Mr. Right Academy is how to give signals and how to green light a man and how to let a man know that you're interested and that it's safe to approach and that it's safe to let you know that he might be interested in you, and showing that warmth and that friendliness and how to do that online, offline, in person. Those are some of the kinds of things that we focus on and learn about in the Mr. Right Academy program, among many other things. So that's the second thing, is that a lot of times men are put in kind of an awkward spot in terms of how they are expected to show up and take the initiative. And yet there's like some spiky spots around that they kind of have to watch out for and be aware of. Which leads me to the third one, is that many men are very lonely. And I know there's a lot of women that are lonely too. Sadly, in this world, there's a lot of people that are lonely. Being alone is not necessarily the same as being lonely. There are people that are alone that still have lives that are very satisfying to them. But being lonely is when you desire more in terms of relationship and connection than you actually have. One of the things that men have shared with me is that they don't necessarily, in most cases, connect with their male friends in the way that a lot of women are able to connect with their female friends. A lot of times women have female friends that they're able to confide in, talk to, share emotional things with, feelings with, where they feel like there's a place for that. A lot of men really have said to me that they just don't have a place to really share their hopes, their dreams, their fears, their failures, because when they go out with the guys, slap on the back, how you doing, buddy? But most of the time, the conversations are centered around an activity or watching a game or having a beer or whatever the case may be. They don't necessarily have the connection in most cases to be able to really, really talk about and share what's going on. It's not always safe to be that vulnerable. In one of my interviews, I was interviewing a man and he almost teared up. And he was basically saying, if we don't have you, if we don't have a woman in our lives, if we don't have you, what do we have? We may have work or we may have a few buddies, but we don't really have any place to really share, to really be vulnerable, to really share our hopes, our dreams, our failures, our disappointments, our heartaches, those kinds of things. We don't have anyone to share that with if we don't have a woman in our lives that is able to be there in that way. And it can be a very lonely and isolating feeling not to have that. So even though there are many women who don't necessarily have a partner, in many cases, a lot of women do have an outlet or a forum or friend or friends that they can share some of those kinds of things with. Now, sadly, not everyone does, because as I said, I think there's a lot of lonely people, period. But I think this is really almost like an epidemic when it comes to this issue with men. I think there's a lot of men that are incredibly lonely. And so men have shared that with me, how much it means to them when they do have the kind of women in their lives that they're able to share those kinds of things with and to be vulnerable with and to be authentic with and real with and safe with, and know that they're not going to be laughed at. They're not going to be rejected. They can fall on their face and someone's still going to love them and still going to care about them. That's an incredible gift when that kind of relationship exists between a man and a woman. So that's number 3. Number 4 is that men often don't have much of an opportunity or are not really allowed, quote unquote, been made safe for them to really share their emotions. So a lot of men are kind of expected to kind of keep their emotions and their feelings and their desires and things like that inside. There's not necessarily, especially an outlet for a man to really be vulnerable in terms of his emotions. Sayings that a lot of men were taught, big boys don't cry, and maybe they had fathers who didn't show a lot of emotion or were very stoic in their relationships or very slow to show expressions of love. And so a lot of men this is not really familiar territory. So even though they might have feelings and they might have emotions, it's often difficult for a man to feel like it's really safe for them to express those feelings. So the next one is that men often feel sad. They feel sad for all of these reasons that we've been talking about. There's a lot of men that suffer from depression, discouragement. Life hasn't gone the way that they wished. They're not where they want to be. A lot of women experience these kinds of things too. And yet a man has perhaps grown up with and had certain societal expectations. Men may feel like in order to really feel loved, they have to have that love based on their accomplishments and what they're providing and what they're doing. Like, it's not just like they're loved for who they are, but it's more like for what they are able to do and provide. And so men do like to be able to do and provide, and that's often how a lot of men show their love. But it's also kind of a catch-22, if you will, because they don't necessarily feel like they are just loved for just who they are. They often feel like they are loved based on what they produce, what they do, and based on results. And this is one of the reasons why it can be a really competitive world for men, is because they're expected to produce and do in order to be valued by the world and by society. It's kind of like the bumper stickers that some men might have on their truck that says, "He who dies with the most toys wins," or "He who dies with the most money wins," is kind of the idea behind it, right? It's kind of like this relentless rat race that a man is expected to be in. The next one is that men are often looked down upon, criticized, or even despised for their basic desires and instincts. Now, one of the things that I often share with my clients, my private clients, my Mr. Right Academy members, is that you want to be with a man who desires you, or at least in most cases, right? You want to be with a man who has some motivation in that direction, who has some drive, who has some romantic kinds of feelings. And yet, in a lot of situations in society, men are rejected, despised, looked down on, hated for their basic instincts and desires. And oftentimes the idea is men only want one thing. Well, men don't just want one thing. Men do often want that one thing, but they also want more than that in most cases. If they're the kind of man that wants a relationship, they want something besides that physical and sexual attraction. They want to have that safety to be themselves, to show themselves, to be vulnerable, and to know that they're going to be accepted and they're going to be respected and that they're not going to be laughed at or rejected when they are not perfect, or when they share vulnerable feelings or fears or doubts about themselves. And yet it's often in society kind of looked like they're disgusting. You know, this is like men are pigs and that kind of thing, this kind of attitude that sometimes can be so demeaning to men. Now, I realize there are men out there that are not respectful and that don't treat women well, and that is absolutely wrong. And that is not something that I would want any woman to allow and to stay in a relationship where she's not treated well. And yet, I do believe that it's also important for women to have a basic respect and to treat a man well if she wants to be in a relationship with him. And another thing that men have shared with me is that they often feel like they're taken for granted. Women can feel taken for granted, but like I said earlier, like men often feel like they just have to produce. And if they stop producing, then that's going to be it. That's going to be the end. So imagine the kind of pressure that can feel like if a man knows if he stumbles or if he falls, that he risks literally losing everything. Just having this compassion and having this understanding for men and just understanding a few things like this, I think can help us to have just a little bit more compassionate view of men and some of the challenges that they might face. One of the things that I would recommend along these lines is just start noticing, catching men in the act of doing something good. If your attitude about men is a little bit negative or a little bit tainted based on some past experiences, that can be real. And yet there's a lot of men that are wonderful. And I have a deep respect for men. And I think there's so many good men out there. And if you can watch and notice men around you, a man who's out with his wife and is treating her really nicely, or a man who's doing something nice for a neighbor, or a man who's showing up in a major or a minor heroic kind of way, if you can start catching men in the act of doing something good, I think that can also impact your view of how you might see men. And that can be very attractive and very appealing. And that can kind of shift your overall perspective about men and can even enhance a good perspective about men. So I love this idea, and I invite you to catch men in the act of doing good, because I think that can also help you to appreciate men more. And when we appreciate men more, we often get the very best results. In fact, it often makes them want to do more, to be even more appreciated. And so they get to feel good by being appreciated and acknowledged and admired for what they're doing and what they're providing. And we also get to reap the benefits of that in many cases by getting more of our wants and needs met. So I just wanted to share these things with you. And I also wanted to say that if you are a woman who would really like to be in a loving, committed partnership, relationship, or marriage with a wonderful man, it's one of the sweet things in life. Having married later in my life and now having been married to my amazing husband, Benjamin, for the last almost 18 years. If you desire that kind of relationship in your life, then I would invite you to consider joining our Mr. Right Academy program, because it's a step-by-step program to support you along your journey from being single and alone, or into dating, or navigating those stages of dating, or establishing a great relationship, or enhancing your communication and connection so that you can have that relationship with the right man. And wherever you're at on that spectrum, there's something for you in the Mr. Right Academy program. We have live Q&A calls and training calls each month, a couple each month, and we often have guest presenters who come in on various topics. We have all kinds of bonuses, way more bonuses than I can even say. As I mentioned, over 100 interviews with men if you really want to understand men. And then we have this loving, beautiful community of women where it's a safe place to share and learn from each other, get your questions answered, not feel alone while you're on the journey. And also we have an incredible website with all kinds of tools and resources and training. We've been running this program for several years, and every month we have new content to help support you on your journey to love. So you can use all of it, part of it, mix and match. If you are a single woman and would really like to have a great relationship with a man, this just might be a great opportunity for you. It's incredibly powerful and yet incredibly affordable. And if you decide to join for an annual membership, then you also get a 1-hour one-on-one coaching session with me where you and I can talk woman to woman, and whatever you would like support on in terms of your journey to love, I'm happy to give you my very best for a 1-hour session. That's with the annual membership. So we can talk about what's going on in your dating life. We can create a plan to help get you on the track to dating. We can discuss a challenge you're having in a relationship, whatever is going to be most valuable to you. And you can use it anytime in your year of membership. And then if you just want to dip your toe in the water and kind of try it out and see how you like it, we also have a monthly membership. You can join and cancel at any time, but we'd love to have you stay. I think you'll want to stay. So if that's of interest to you, or you think it would be beneficial for you and haven't quite been able to figure this out on your own, click on the links below. You'll see the option to join either an annual or a monthly membership. And you also will be able to hear a little video of some of our members sharing some of their experience from Mr. Right Academy. So thank you so much for joining me, and thank you for being a part of my email list or YouTube channel or wherever you found me from. And thank you for listening. And if you enjoy this, feel free to share this video. I hope that you will take this opportunity and take my invitation to catch men in the act of doing something good. Because if you take nothing else away from this video, I think that will enhance your ability to see men through those eyes of compassion, and will also help you to feel better in your interactions and relationships with men. So be sure to check out the links. Consider joining us in Mr. Right Academy. And thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you here soon. Okay, take care. Bye for now.